Hello, welcome to everyone. Uh, I'm Roberto Piselli from the Ministry of Environment in Peru, and thank you for your participation. I remind you to please keep your headphones on at all times, and welcome to the event From Local to Global, Advances in Regional Climate Action in Peru, Focus on Sustainable Development, organized by Peru and supported by the Resilience Hub. To start this event, I would like to invite the Vice Minister of Strategic Development of Natural Resources of the Peruvian Ministry of the Environment, Raquel Soto, for the welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon. Dear guests, welcome and thank you very much for joining us for the side event titled From Local to Global, Advances in Regional Climate Action in Peru, oriented towards sustainable development, organized by the Ministry of the Environment of Peru with support from the Resilience Hub. This space for exchange and reflection on climate action at the national level aims to share our progress, experiences, and challenges with the goal of strengthening climate action in our country and promoting effective adaptation to the effects of climate change. We especially thank our panelists who, from their respective organizations, will provide us with valuable perspective to continue driving a more inclusive and sustainable climate agenda across the country, and above all, help us identify concrete pathways to build a more resilient Peru in the face of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Minister. Next, I would like to invite the General Director of Climate Change and the Certification of MINAM to give us a presentation on progress of climate action at the subnational level in Peru. Please welcome Berioska Quispe.
Now, thank you very much. I don't have the. I have a presentation and I don't have the. I don't have the passer. Thank you very much for being here and also for joining us today. And I want to share with all of you about our action inside adaptation issues. As you know, Peru is a country that is near to the ocean and also has a big or highlands. So for that reason, many times there are several impacts that came in our country. More of them are related with droughts. Actually, during September, we have suffered with the impacts that come from forest fires related to the those are not completely related with climate change, but they have a relation about it because it's related to climate change. And thank you very much. We have been speaking about those different impacts. We have already speak about forest fires, and also we have different landslides in our country, and also more are related. More of them becomes even greater, even frequently in the coming during the last years, and in the coming years they will be more frequent than before. So we have put, first of all, an effort in trying to have a law that treats all the climate change action and support inside our climate change law. In that law, we have put an effort to try to give a integral vision related to climate change, and we have put different measures. When we are speaking about adaptation, we need to have many measures that are gender-related measures. So we have gender responsive measures. Sorry. Responsive measures. And the other thing that is we need to coordinate with the whole government and in different levels of the government. Instead, local, regional, and national approaches. And we have, in 2021, we have approved our national adaptation plan. In that plan, we try to get in every different vulnerable sectors and try to have different roadmap to try to get the adaptation measures. More the measures are related with the increasing our efforts in trying to get early warning systems, because if you are in the territory, if you have fisheries or if you have agriculture, you need to have, if there are impacts that come from climate change or are related with climate change. And we have put an effort about long-term climate impacts, and we need to build different scenarios, climate change scenarios, with the information with the best information that we can reach at the moment. And also, we have put this vision from national to local level, and trying to put also effort in give the mandate to different local authorities to approve their own plan, their own adaptation and mitigation plan. But that plans need to be related with the national adaptation plan in order to have an integral approach around in all the areas. So maybe you can see that is complex, but in this complexity, we need to find a way to try to provide different instruments, tools, and also different ideas in different sectors, because we need first monitoring the actions, monitoring the impacts, and also we need to provide them enough tools to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And at last, that is the vision that we have. We have already 5 regions that has approved their regional plans. In that plans, more are related with the NDCs. adaptation and mitigation NDCs, and also we have started with all other regions in trying to update their regional plans, and also we are working with different institutions at the local level, trying to provide technical assistance to the different municipalities, trying to provide the different local assistance to the different municipalities in the country in trying to get their local plans. Because we have almost 2,000 different local governments, and they need to approve their own local adaptation and mitigation plan. And right now, 2 of them have been approved, and we have in the pipeline a lot of governments that we are working on in trying to approve in the coming months their own plan. Many times we have provided them with the information, with the maps, and right now we are trying also to work with the private sector, because we have information that comes from the national to the local level, but the kind of information that we have is gonna be at the local level, but is gonna be useful also for a private sector level. For example, one forest for an hectare can be managed with this information. And maybe you can saw the advance in the different regions about their implementation in their regional climate change plans, but most of them are related with the integration between the measures that is included in our NDC and how can we work with the national and regional and local level as a multi-level approach. At last, we can see first we have put effort in trying to work as a multi-level approach, trying to get the engagement with the different municipalities and also regional governments in trying to engage them with the implementation of our NDCs. And in that way, they also have helped us to find a way to provide different information as a feedback process, because we have put the information first, they have put in action their measures, and they also can provide new information that can feedback all the cycle again. Only to conclude, as I mentioned, we have almost 2,000 different local governments. We are working with them, but right now we need to scale up the information. But in the panel, I know you will see specific information and specific approaches in the
Thank you, Berioska. Peru has been making progress in climate action with an emphasis on the territorial level because it ultimately that changes to reduce climate risk and greenhouse gas emissions are reflected in the territories and pay special attention to the various groups vulnerable to the impacts and effects of climate change. We will now move to a panel discussion to hear their impressions, perception and experiences regarding what we have just seen in the presentation. For this, we welcome Natalia Laiza, Climate Finance Manager at the World Resources Institute, Rosa Morales, Climate Change, Amazon and Water Resources Program Manager at CARE Peru, and Andrés Mogro, Manager of the Climate Resilience and Transition Program at Avina. The panel will comprise of two rounds of questions, where each panelist will have 3 minutes to respond each. After that, our General Director will give some concluding remarks. So, the first question for all our panelists is, from your experience with other countries and the work of your institutions, what aspects do you highlight as innovative or replicable regarding the advances that Peru is making in subnational climate action and its involvement with vulnerable communities?
Well, hello everyone, very nice to see you here. So first of all, I would like to start by giving some context on the urgency of how right now, based on the UNFCCC Secretary report, we are not on track to meet our NDCs, and there is currently not enough climate resilient opportunities to close that gap. Basically, the current climate resilient opportunities are shrinking according to the IPCC. However, there are certain enablers that we can put in place to address this situation. And one of these enablers is the inclusive governance. And Peru has different innovative, great examples that we can replicate across different regions. And I would like to start by basically sharing that these inclusive governance examples are very important throughout the different stages of climate action. And by stages, I mean the planning, the implementation, and of course the monitoring. So in terms of planning, I think that the Ministry of Environment, for example, had put together different mechanisms to include the vision, the views of different subnational entities as well as vulnerable communities. If we remember the first NDC process, they put together a working group where the draft of the NDC was shared with these different groups to gather their inputs, and also the final document was also presented in these different spaces to have an approval. And also, besides the planning, we also have the implementation. So the implementation is crucial when we're talking about the different climate action commitments, because we need to have the policies, the economic and the financial instruments and policies as well in place to make sure that we are, in this case, for example, when I'm referring to climate finance, to be sure that we are aligning and mobilizing climate finance towards these goals. And specifically in the case of Peru, I would like to highlight a couple of examples that include the participation and actually the communities as the core of specific projects. And I'm referring to a couple of the projects that were approved, I think, last year by the Green Climate Fund. And I'm very, very glad to say the national accredited entity was involved in this process. I'm referring to Profonampe, specifically to the project Eco-Bio Business Facility, which has the aim to provide technical assistance and also grant-based support to a small community-based actors. And also there's another project that was approved. I'm referring to the Resilient Puna. And again, this is a project that is focusing on ecosystem adaptation priorities, and it aims to improve the ownership and the resources of indigenous Andean and local communities. So these are a couple of examples on how there are some implementation elements in place in Peru to enhance the participation of not only subnational entities, but also the vulnerable communities that are in the heart of climate action. And I would like just to conclude by the final stage that is very relevant for the climate action. I'm referring to the monitoring of these different stages, and of course what all of these stages provide. We're talking about, we have in the planning, we have the policies, we have the strategies and implementation. We also have policies that aim to increase climate finance or that aim to achieve climate climate action in the ground, but there is a need to ensure that we are monitoring these efforts. And I think Peru has made a very significant effort by establishing for a while ago, the National Climate Change Commission, where there is a space or there is a voice for the regional entities and also indigenous population, not only to assess the policies, the climate change policies, but also to assess progress towards the climate commitments. So I think that the inclusive governance, which is an enabler that the IPCC has identified as crucial to achieve also these, or to close the gap of our emissions commitments, I think it's relevant to also take into account the different stages that are in place, and also to recognize that Peru has been definitely engaging on these three, not only on one or two. So I just wanted to conclude my intervention with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Now let's hear from Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the Ministry of the Environment to allow CARE Peru to participate in this event. I would like to, for the first question, I would like to make 3 points. The first one has to do with something that Berioska mentioned, which is related to gender, to the gender aspect, that it's very important when we work on climate adaptation, the vulnerability that women have related to the impacts, the adverse impacts of climate change is something that we have to work a lot. Peru is embracing this. There are women working in Peru. There are women organizations, and CARE Peru is also working at this with this issue. I want to give an example. We have just started a project on adaptation of women to climate change in the highlands in Ayacucho and Huancavelica. And there we're applying a tool which I will talk a little bit on that too. The second aspect has to do with something that Natalia just mentioned, which is the intercultural approach. We are working with indigenous peoples in the highlands, in the Amazon, and also in the coast. This is something that Peru is embracing also, and the government has this indigenous platform also that works on climate change issues, and that came from the bylaw of the climate change law when we made when the country made the consultation, the indigenous consultation at some years ago. And the third point that I want to make has to do with tools. And all of these three elements that I am pointing out, I think that they can be replicated. This project that I mentioned before is a project that is embraced in a program, a global program of CARE International, which is applied also in Ecuador, Laos, and Vietnam. And we would like to have all these examples and these actions by the indigenous population to be also part of the knowledge that we have in terms of climate adaptation. So when it comes to the tools, for instance, and this is only an example, right? Because many institutions do have different tools. And in CARE, what we have is what we call the CVCA, which is a climate vulnerability capacity assessment. And the nice thing of this tool is that first, it's flexible in the terms that it has to be adapted to the reality that we are working with. It's different to apply it to a coastal zone community or an Amazonian community or an highlands community. And this is only the examples, 3 examples of Peru. And the other thing, which I think it's very, very important when we work on climate adaptation at this time when we have these global changes, is that it embraces also the issue of ecosystems and conservation. Because as we know, part of the means of living of these vulnerable populations are in their ecosystems and how they are managed and preserved also. So 3 things: gender, intercultural approach, and the flexibility of tools that we apply. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosa. Now it's Andres' turn to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to take off this. It feels very weird to listen to oneself. I don't know how you guys did it. So thank you again for the invitation from the Ministry of Environment of Peru to join this this panel. As our moderator was saying, I work in Fundación Avina, and Fundación Avina has been involved in a regional project with Peru from the Swiss cooperation called Andes Resilientes. So I'm going to speak from the experience of that project, and to do so I want to give everyone just a little bit of background on what Andes Resilientes is and what it has been doing the last 4 years. So tiny background. Andes Resilientes, like I said, is a regional project financed by the Swiss Cooperation and implemented by Fundación Avina and Helvetas Swiss Intercooperation, and it's focused on improving resilience and reducing vulnerability in family agriculture in the Andes. It is doing so, and this is partly my response to this question, it is doing so from what we see as a very innovative way, because it tries to work on the intersection of 3 sectors that solely, if you look at an individual sector, will not acknowledge that it's the competence of that sector to work on that thing, which is the intersection of environment, agriculture, and social inclusion. And in the case of Peru, we've been working in the last years with the Ministry of Environment of Peru, but also with the Ministry of Desarrollo Agrario and Riego, Desarrollo e Inclusión Social, and FONCODES. And we've been working with these 3 sectors in the intersection of climate action and vulnerable family agriculture actors. And I think just coming back to the question on what it is that you need to do to include subnational actor and so subnational climate action and involve vulnerable communities is particularly finding what those intersections. And in the case of Peru, for instance, working in Andes Resilientes, I think is one of the bold activities that you can do to involve those actions, because the challenge of climate change policies, and in particular when you look at subnational actors, is that it's not necessarily the competence of the national government to work on these specific sectors that climate action imply in the subnational government. And it requires coordination with other sectors also that may be implementing climate policies, but that haven't identified that link explicitly. And for instance, the social inclusion sector that tends to work with the poorest and bringing them out of that socioeconomic situation is of course working on enhancing vulnerability and reducing resilience, but it doesn't recognize those policies in that way. And I think creating that link is key. And the other issue is that coordinating with subnational governments in their development plans, like the Ministry of Environment, which is mentioning, is key, because the competences of subnational actors, of subnational governments, are closer to the ground, and they're closer to vulnerable communities, like the issues of agriculture, irrigation, infrastructure, health, waste management, which are not necessarily the competences of the national government when you look at province level. So strengthening that link is crucial, and developing the capacities and the channels for subnational information to be reflected in national strategies, like the national adaptation plans, like NDCs, or like biennial transparency reports, which is the big challenge that developing countries are going through right now, is also a long process, but is a much needed one. And it's a process of developing capacities and developing the regulations for that to happen, but also building the interest of subnational stakeholders to be part of these national processes.
Thank you, Andres. Now we would like our panelists' thoughts on our second question, which is, what do you consider are the main challenges and also opportunities to promote climate action at subnational level to implement our NAP and achieve the NDC? I don't know if anybody wants to start. Let's go with Natalia.
Thank you very much for a question. So I think that, and this is very related to the first one, I would say, in terms of, first of all, I I mentioned what is the importance of having an inclusive governance and the importance of identifying how this can be enhanced throughout the different stages. But then what are the challenges to ensure that the subnational level on vulnerable communities are also considered? I would say definitely we need to enhance open governance from a perspective of climate finance. And basically, when we talk about open governance, we're referring to enhancing citizen awareness, engagement, and access to the information. And it basically relies on three principles: on transparency, participation, and accountability. And I would like to focus on the first one, on transparency. So when I was explaining the need of the implementation of identifying what are the different policies and instruments that countries need to have in place to achieve or to implement their NDCs or different climate commitments that they may have under the climate change strategy, for example, there is a need to identify what are the climate finance needs. And this is important to analyze not only at a national level, but also at a subnational level, and identifying what is the role of the different stakeholders and also the different actors that will have a role specifically on implementing these activities. So that's the first element, if we want to refer to it as part of the or under the transparency principle of open governance. And then there's also the need to identify how much climate finance is provided or is mobilized towards these different actors. And this will allow, if we identify what are the needs and we identify how much is being mobilized or how much is being delivered to these specific actors to achieve this goal, we will be able to identify the gap. And by identifying the gap, we will be able to develop our implementation plan or implementation strategy to help these subnational entities and vulnerable communities to achieve these targets. So it's important, once we have this transparency mechanism in place at a national level, also to involve these actors on the design of the different methodologies or climate budget tracking systems, for example, so that they can all understand what is the information that is going to be available for them to then include them in the accountability process to review and assess this finance data that's going to be provided by, depending the ministry that is leading this action. But the idea is to have these actors, again, subnational entities in vulnerable communities, to be part of the decision making through the availability of this data, specifically through budget regulations and also the different implementation strategies that will be put in place to implement the NDCs or also the NAPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Rosa, please.
Thank you, Roberto. For this second question, I would like to make 2 points. The first one has to do with what we find in the field, and when we have this landscape approach and when we go to a territory. People in the territory do not say, okay, I have the problem of climate change, and on the other hand, I have the problem of health or access to water. They, it's the intersection that Andres mentioned before. And I think that is a very huge challenge, but it's also an opportunity to bring the other sectors into the table and into working on these different issues. The second thing is more related to how do we link this with our, for example, national adaptation plan. Because it's made into the national level, right? But Berioska mentioned the different local level, let's say, instruments that we also have, and the link between these instruments to the national ones is something that it's also a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, I would say. And there, the role of the different stakeholders working in the territories is very important, and the way in which the different organizations are organized and they can work very coordinated into these issues is going to be something that may link these local levels to the national level, and with this territorial view and with this intersectional approach, let's say. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosa. Now let's hear from Andres.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I think it's very, I don't want to say difficult, but I'm going to say challenging. So it's an opportunity. I've identified 3 challenges and 3 opportunities to including subnational stakeholders on implementing NDCs and NAPs. The first challenge, I would say, and I think we've all more or less touched upon this, is the challenge that climate change and even environment is not necessarily a priority for subnational actors. But when you do have a conversation around their priorities, they will mention things that are linked to climate change or linked to environment. And those say issues like, for instance, agriculture, irrigation, infrastructure, health, transport, waste management. But we know that all of those are related to climate change. And that's the first challenge. The second is that the main channel of communication with the national government is not necessarily the Ministry of Environment or the climate agenda. Nonetheless, there is a clear link between these issues, and I think that link is sometimes not clear enough for subnational stakeholders or even for national stakeholders that are working on the climate agenda. The need for us, for instance, working in the climate sector to be involved in the agendas of infrastructure, of health, of irrigation is also something that is not always in the climate agenda. The third challenge, I think, is that when that link is made clear, the tools and the methodologies to influence what happens in those sectoral agendas from the climate perspective need to be in place. And that means being in the capacity to provide indicators, guidelines, procedures, channels of communication, and even the backing norms and regulation so that this relation that is developed between the subnational governments and the national governments doesn't depend on the willingness of people, but also on the roles and the competencies of institutions that are backed through regulation. And when those tools and regulations are there, I think the final challenge is an issue of capacity building and building capacities in a way that can be retained at the institutional level and that doesn't depend on capacities of specific people. I think that's very, very difficult to do. And in terms of opportunities, I see 3 opportunities. So the first, as I was saying, is that there is an evident link between the competencies of local stakeholders and subnational governments and climate change. And the evidence of that link is becoming more and more clear. So therefore, there's an opportunity for subnational stakeholders to be already working on adaptation and mitigation, but not sufficiently aware or with that clear as a link as it should be. The second opportunity, I think, is that national regulations like the ones that we saw from the Ministry of Environment, like NAPs and NDCs, provide a clear and transparent horizon for subnational stakeholders to know what the priorities and plans of the national government are. And the process, and thus, the process of developing NDC is key. So to guarantee the inclusion of subnational actors so that they can feel that the national objectives are also owned by them. So the issue of ownership is very important. And the final opportunity that I want to point out is the biennial transparency report. Now, the biennial transparency report is a very big challenge. For me personally, it's the biggest challenge of the Paris Agreement. It's much more difficult to do a BTR than to do an NDC. But including the information of subnational stakeholders in the BTR is the challenge. If you just include national information or the information of a ministry, developing a BTR is very easy. So that opportunity to include data from subnational stakeholders and to make them see that evidencing their action at the international level is an opportunity, I think is something that should also be exploited.
Thank you, Andres, and I would like to thank all our panelists for their valuable insights. Now I will give the word to Berioska for her closing remarks.
Thank you all of you for joining us today as a panelist and also as attendants. And I want to start with the last minutes with the intervention from Andres. He said that is challenging, but it's also a big opportunity to work on related the transparency report. I don't know there is a provisional table for that, but we can try to do anything. But the other thing that I want to raise is related with the intervention from Natalia. She said that enough financial provisions for the commitments for all that information, not only about information, is also about action, is really a need, and there are a big gap, as she mentioned. And at last, but not least, as Rosa mentioned, all the things are not related with climate change, even not related with environmental things, but all of them are related with development. If you think to provide water in the territories, you need to think about how can you relate those gaps of different resource that the people in the territories need, trying to put the layer about climate action in every sector. I always say there are no sectors that will not suffer with the impacts from climate change, and at the same time there are no sectors that don't have the opportunity to take action in mitigation. So for that reason, we are working right now, and we have a previous side event related with our long-term strategy. So we are working and trying to approve the intervention with to approve the long-term strategy, but it's also related with the national adaptation plans and also the work in the territories, and at last is related with all the climate action that we need to put in real action, trying to close the gap in order to achieve the 1.5 goal. Many thanks for joining us, and many thanks for your participation.
Thank you, Berioska. That concludes our panel, and I would like to thank our presenter, our panelists, and also the attendants.